Have you ever heard of a warrior force so fearsome, so disciplined, and so unshakably loyal that foreign generals refused to believe they were real? A force made entirely of women who charged straight into gunfire, who fought with unmatched ferocity, and who earned a chilling reputation across West Africa and Europe. They never knew fear, and they never knew defeat. Our journey begins in the ancient Kingdom of Dahomey, a small but fiercely independent nation on the West African coast. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, this kingdom rose to power not through sheer numbers, but through strategy, culture, and an extraordinary military force known as the Agojie. To outsiders, they were the Dahomey Amazons. To their people, they were protectors of the throne, symbols of loyalty, courage, and spiritual strength. But Dahomey was more than a backdrop for a legend. It was a land of vibrant red earth, fortified palace walls, carved wooden gates depicting victories of kings, and the rhythmic pulse of drums echoing through the night. In this world of tradition, ritual, and rising conflict, the Agojie were born women who surrendered their ordinary lives to serve the king, trained harder than any man, and lived under a single rule: become unbreakable or be forgotten. Why did this kingdom choose women for war? How did they rise to become one of the most elite fighting forces in African history? And what made them capable of standing against and defeating 80,000 French troops during the colonial invasions? These are questions that history books often simplify, but the truth is far more dramatic. To understand the power of the Agojie, we must first understand the world that shaped them, a world filled with political rivalries, spiritual beliefs, and a culture that honored bravery above all else. In the next part, we will uncover who these women were, how they were chosen, and what forged them into the legendary Dahomey warriors who never lost a battle. To understand the unstoppable power of the Dahomey warriors, we must step inside the palace walls of Dahomey, the beating heart of the kingdom, where rituals, politics, and military strategy intertwined. This was where the Agojie were shaped, trained, and transformed from ordinary girls into battle-hardened warriors. But who were they truly? Contrary to the myths created by European soldiers, the Agojie were not wild women of the forest. They were daughters of farmers, daughters of captured enemies, daughters of noble families, chosen for their strength, their agility, or simply their refusal to bow before anyone. Some joined voluntarily, seeking honor. Others were given to the king as tribute. But once they entered the palace, they all shared the same destiny: to serve, to fight, and to protect. Among them were hunters with sharp instincts, runners who could outpace horses, and young girls whose eyes carried the quiet fire of defiance. Many had lost families to war, and in the Agojie, they found not only purpose, but a new home. Life inside the women's barracks was unlike anything in the world outside. While Dahomey society followed strict gender roles, the Agojie lived in complete reversal of it. They trained with machetes, spears, clubs, and later, muskets. Their days began before sunrise and ended long after dusk. They went obstacle courses over spiked fences, practiced breaking through thickets with bare hands, and even underwent emotional conditioning to eliminate fear. Each woman swore an oath of chastity, not because they lacked desire, but because the king believed a warrior should belong only to the battlefield. In return, they were granted privileges no ordinary woman could dream of: food, wealth, honor, and the absolute respect of the kingdom. Dahomey's architecture, music, and traditions shaped every layer of their existence. Training yards flanked by murals of ancient kings reminded them of the legacy they were expected to uphold. The heartbeat of war drums guided their drills, while the chants of palace riots recounted the victories of past generations. Even the intricate beadwork on their uniforms carried meaning, stories of power woven into each color and pattern. Leading them were commanders known as Agojie and elite captains chosen for their tactical brilliance. These women were not only warriors but advisors to the king, shaping military decisions and negotiating matters of war. It was within this intense environment that the Agojie forged their identity, a blend of spirituality, discipline, and unyielding loyalty. They did not fight simply for survival. They fought for a kingdom that had given them a place to belong, a name that echoed in fear across West Africa, and a legacy that would outlive even the most powerful conquerors. But their legend truly ignited when fate pushed them into battles that would define history, battles against rival kingdoms, expanding empires, and eventually, one of the strongest military powers on earth, France. The rise of the Agojie was remarkable, but their true legend was forged not in training yards or palace rituals, but on battlefields where empires collided and the ground itself trembled beneath thousands of marching feet. To understand how these women became the nightmare of colonizers, we must step into the mid-19th century, a period when West Africa was shifting violently. Rival kingdoms fought for territory, trade routes were contested, and European powers, armed with industrial weaponry and burning ambition, sought to carve the continent into empires. It was in this storm that the Agojie were tested. The first flames of war, their early battles were against neighboring kingdoms, the Oyo Empire, the Mahi people, and other regional rivals. Witnesses described the Agojie charging with incredible discipline, moving as a single lethal wave, machetes raised high. They advanced through tall grasslands, slipping between trees with the stealth of hunters. Their war cry, sharp, rhythmic, almost ritualistic, echoed across the plains. French officers who later studied these accounts were stunned. How could women fight this way? How could they overpower male armies twice their size? But the Agojie were not defined by gender. They were defined by training, unity, and an unshakable belief in their cause. The march toward the French by the late 1800s. Tension with France had reached a breaking point. The French wanted Dahomey's coastal territories, vital for control of trade. The Dahomey kings, relying heavily on Agojie's strength, refused to kneel to foreign demands. The clash was inevitable. When French forces, estimated at up to 80,000 soldiers across the campaign, pushed inward, they expected quick victory. After all, they had rifles, cannons, and naval support. What they did not expect was the ferocity of the Agojie, the battle descriptions that shocked Europe. Survivors described the Agojie charging straight into gunfire, weaving through bullets with terrifying agility. Some soldiers claimed they saw Agojie warriors continue fighting even after sustaining deep wounds, refusing to fall until their final breath. The French called them unimaginably brave, unnaturally relentless. One French officer wrote that he watched an Agojie commander scale a thorn-covered barricade with her bare hands, leaping onto a French soldier before he even had time to reload. Another described how the women slipped through dense forests at night, launching surprise attacks with the precision of trained assassins. What the French saw as madness was, in reality, strategy. The Agojie learned to adapt. They used the rain as a weapon. They ambushed supply lines. They attacked from the trees, from tall grasses, from blind angles the French never anticipated. For every battle the French planned on maps, the Agojie tore those plans apart with raw instinct and unconventional tactics. The emotional weight of war. But behind the heroism lay another story, the silent pain carried by these women. Many wrote in their final letters or oral testimonies that they fought not only for the king, but for their sisters in arms. They fought to defend their home, their identity, and the traditions that shaped them. Imagine the fear they must have felt, and yet, imagine the courage it took to move anyway. The battlefield was their world. Victory was their language. Loyalty was their heartbeat. A legacy sealed in fire. Though Dahomey eventually fell under French rule, the Agojie's legend did not end. Their unmatched resistance, especially during the early assaults, where they repeatedly halted French advances, stunned Europe and forever stamped their name into military history. And now that the climax has been revealed, the question remains, what happened to Dahomey afterward? How did society respond when the indomitable Agojie could no longer shield the kingdom? When the smoke of the final battles began to fade, the Kingdom of Dahomey found itself standing at the edge of an irreversible transformation. The Agojie had fought with a fury that shook even the most seasoned French commanders of colonial power, driven by industrial weaponry and relentless expansion, eventually tightened its grip on West Africa. The fall of Dahomey did not happen in a single moment. It happened in the quiet that followed the thunder of war. The emotional echo of defeat for the first time in generations. The people of Dahomey faced a world where the Agojie, the shield of the kingdom, could not protect them. The emotional shock rippled through every corner of society. Elders whispered stories around fires, recalling the nights when the warriors' footsteps shook the palace grounds. Mothers wept in secret. Many had daughters who never returned from the battlefield. Young men, once inspired by the Agojie's discipline, struggled to understand how even these ironwood women could be overcome. But defeat did not erase respect, it amplified it. Despite their losses, the Agojie became symbols of resistance, proof that Dahomey did not surrender easily to foreign rule. How society shifted colonial rule brought forced labor, new laws, and a foreign system of governance that clashed sharply with Dahomey's traditions. Village chiefs were replaced or stripped of power. Cultural rituals were banned or tightly controlled. Even clothing and hairstyles were regulated in attempts to Europeanize the population. Yet through all these changes, memories of the Agojie remained a silent protest. Women across Dahomey began to walk with a new sense of dignity, inspired by those who had once defied armies. Some picked up roles that had been traditionally reserved for men. Others kept alive the rituals, songs, and dance steps that honored the spirit of the female warriors. French soldiers, though victorious, wrote extensively about the courage they had witnessed. Their letters and reports circulated through Europe, generating both fear and fascination. Many French officers admitted that the Agojie were the most disciplined, tactically inventive, and fearless fighters they had ever encountered. The ordinary lives impacted in marketplaces. Old traders spoke of nights when the Agojie patrolled the capital with flaming torches, a sight that made children stare with awe. Farmers who had once supplied food to the palace found themselves recounting stories of Agojie warriors visiting their villages, training in the forest, or purchasing supplies with the seriousness of generals. Families who had lost daughters to the barracks carried a strange mix of sorrow and pride. Their grief was softened by the understanding that their daughters had died with honor, defending a kingdom that valued bravery above bloodline. A society searching for meaning. The loss of the Agojie created a void not only militarily, but spiritually. The kingdom had depended on these women as protectors of tradition, as enforcers of law, and as symbols of divine authority. Without them, many felt that a piece of Dahomey's soul had disappeared. In response, the people clung even tighter to oral storytelling. Riots traveled from village to village, recounting tales of Agojie warriors who performed impossible feats. Children memorized these stories, passing them to the next generation as an act of cultural survival. Because even if the kingdom had changed, the spirit of the Agojie refused to fade. The question that remained after the dust of colonization settled, Dahomey's people were left to ask themselves, what do we do with the legacy of warriors who never lost even when their kingdom eventually did? What does bravery mean in a world reshaped by foreign hands? These questions would shape the cultural identity of future generations and led to the legacy we now explore. Even after the fall of Dahomey, the legacy of the Agojie, the fearless warrior women who stood unbroken against empires, refused to slip into silence. Instead, their story rippled across generations, shaping cultural identity, inspiring movements, and reminding the world of a truth often forgotten in history, that courage has no gender. The lessons etched in time, from their discipline to their unshakable loyalty, the Agojie left behind a series of lessons that continue to echo through West African culture. Lesson 1. Bravery is a choice, not a birthright. The Agojie were not born extraordinary, they became extraordinary. Their transformation from village girls into elite warriors taught future generations that strength is built through discipline, persistence, and purpose. Lesson 2. Stand for what you believe even against giants. The French were a global military superpower. Dahomey was a small kingdom, yet the Agojie faced them without hesitation. Their resistance became a symbol across Africa for fighting oppression, no matter the odds. Lesson 3. Unity creates power. Whether training, fighting, or performing rituals, the Agojie moved as one, a single body, a single will. Their bond became a powerful example of how solidarity can transform individuals into a force greater than the sum of their parts. The cultural legacy that survived. Though the kingdom changed, the cultural heartbeat of the Agojie lived on. In Benin modern-day Dahomey, annual festivals, dances, and reenactments still honor the warrior women. Traditional songs recount their bravery. Grandmothers tell stories about the Agojie's night raids, their fierce loyalty to the king, and their belief that courage was a sacred duty. Some descendants of Agojie families still live near Agojie. They preserve heirlooms, blades, uniforms, and ceremonial beads passed down through generations. Each object holds memories, a direct connection to a time when women carried the weight of a kingdom on their shoulders. Their influence on modern society in recent decades, the Agojie have gained global recognition. They have been studied by historians, depicted in documentaries, and used as symbols of African pride and female empowerment. For many African women, the Agojie represent proof that leadership and martial skill ran deep in their heritage. For activists worldwide, they stand as icons of resistance. For historians, they challenge outdated narratives that underestimate the complexity of African civilization. Even the global film industry found inspiration in them, depicting versions of the Agojie in modern cinema, though often dramatized. These portrayals sparked renewed interest in uncovering their true history, the spiritual value they left behind. Beyond weapons and tactics, the Agojie carried a spiritual worldview. They believed their strength came from discipline, ancestors, and duty. Today, many Beninese people continue to honor these beliefs through rituals, offerings, and annual ceremonies at the old royal palaces. Their legacy is not simply that they fought. Their legacy is how they fought with unwavering honor, absolute focus, and an iron bond with their sisters in arms. What we inherit today, looking at the world now, with its complexities and shifting challenges, the Agojie's story reminds us of something profound. History is not shaped only by kings, empires, or conquerors, but by those who dare to stand their ground, even when the world says they shouldn't. Their footsteps may have faded from the red earth of Dahomey, but their values remain alive in courage, in identity, in the unbreakable spirit of resistance. Yet their story is not finished, because the Agojie left behind a question that still lingers today, one that shapes how we remember them. As we reach the final chapter of this journey, the story of the Agojie, the Dahomey warrior women who never lost a battle, unfolds, not as a closed book, but as a living legacy. Their footsteps have long faded from the red soil of Dahomey, yet their influence continues to shape identities, inspire movements, and challenge the world's understanding of strength. A legacy that refuses to die. The Agojie may have fought their last battle more than a century ago, but their story echoes across continents. Their memories are preserved in oral histories whispered at night, in royal palaces where murals still depict their bravery, and in the hearts of millions who find courage in their example. In Benin today, tourists walk the pathways where Agojie warriors once trained. Local guides gesture to the earth and say, "This is where they ran. This is where they learned to become fearless." Yet, what truly endures is not the physical space, but the mindset that bravery can be taught and fear can be defeated. Their influence on the modern world. Across Africa, the Agojie have become symbols of empowerment.
If we look
Women's
at the market data,
organizations
there's a
use
clear
their
opportunity
image as
for
inspiration
expansion.
for
That
leadership
aligns with the
training.
projections.
Schools teach their story as part of national identity. Historians re-examine their role to correct decades of misunderstanding from colonial writings. In the global conversation, the Agojie challenge stereotypes. They remind the world that African kingdoms were not primitive tribes but complex, organized nations with sophisticated military structures, and that women were not merely bystanders to history, but central figures shaping it. Films, books, and academic research continue to shine a spotlight on the Agojie. Although dramatized at times, these works bring millions of people closer to the truth that these women were not fantasy, they were real, disciplined, and extraordinary. The unfinished story, but for all we know about the Agojie, many questions remain unanswered. What were their personal thoughts during the final days of Dahomey? How did they see themselves as protectors, warriors, or symbols of something greater? What became of the few survivors after the French occupation? And how many stories were lost forever, carried away by time? These gaps are not weaknesses in the narrative. They are invitations, reminders that history is a living puzzle, waiting for new voices to continue the search. A future built on their spirit as new generations rise. The Agojie's influence grows stronger. Young Africans look to them as models of discipline and unity. Creators, filmmakers, and historians continue to revive their legend, and around the world, people rediscover the power of a story that refuses to fade. Their legacy is a challenge to us all. Will we honor courage when we see it? Will we protect the truths that shape our history? Will we dare to stand unbroken when life demands it? The Agojie stood against empires. They fought for identity, for community, and for the right to exist without fear. And though time has carried their bodies away, their spirit still marches fierce, determined, unstoppable. So as we close this final chapter, one question remains. But is this truly the entire story? Or is there still more waiting to be uncovered?